The first thing to say is that the events in Dallas are a tragedy and an outrage. The idea that innocent officers of the law would be targeted in this way, in some kind of twisted retribution. We know that it is a miscalculated move. We know that it is just evil. But I think sometimes the news story overruns the last story, which overruns the last story, and it only compounds the frustration. We have to recognize that nothing happens in isolation, and the context of culture in America, and I'm actually increasingly afraid, in the United Kingdom, is volatile and xenophobic and racist. And this is what we have to address with policy, with education, with changes in the way we police and the way we see each other. I learnt my lessons about race really staunchly, not just in America, but here. But when I first moved to America in 1988 to pursue my dream to become an NBA basketball player, I went to high school for 1 year in Toledo, Ohio. And in the first week there, one lunchtime, I was ushered to a table where I found myself surrounded by a group of Black and Latino students who looked at me earnestly and said, "Look, you're from England, so you won't understand the reality." And they sat with me there, and then they gave me the talk again, where they explained exactly how I should respond when, not if, I had an interaction with the police. When, not if, I was in a car and it got stopped by the police, how I needed to thrust my hands outside of the car window so that the police couldn't claim that I was reaching for something if I got shot. This is the context that exists currently. It's a context that's becoming all too familiar. The Met Police have talked in England about the rise of hate crime. And it's in this context where we dehumanize certain groups of people, whether they be Black and brown people, whether they be Polish immigrants, whether they be police. And when we dehumanize, we can do atrocious things to each other. About a month ago, I had the honor of meeting President Obama when he came to London. And I was very honored that the president suggested that I had played a role in the amazing progress that the LGBT community has made over the last 20 years. But then we both shook our heads and lamented at the fact that somehow, even with a Black president, even with significant people out there in the Black community rallying people to the cause of equality, we seem to slide back into a position where even politicians can say reprehensible things about Black people, where they can say terrible things about immigrants from Mexico, where the color of someone's skin once again makes them not quite human. And then we wonder when tragedy happens. We wonder today as we look at the assassination of these 5 officers and the hurt to their families. And yet somehow we overlook the idea that Black people are being executed on a day-to-day basis. And this is the frustration and the tension that builds. And this is why people say Black Lives Matter. It means that, of course, everybody should matter. But at the moment, we're in a situation where evidentially Black lives don't count quite as much. Where when you look at the statistics, you are just exponentially more likely to be shot by the police if you're a Black person than a white person, where you can open carry as a white person and expect nothing from law enforcement, and you can expect to be arrested if you do the same as a Black person. We've seen this time and time and time again. And you may not think this is your issue, and you may think I'm only talking about this because I'm a Black person. But if we want a better society, now is the time to act. Now is not the time to add a pithy comment on Twitter. Now is the time to decide never again to abdicate your right to vote. Never again, when something happens with your representative, do you stay silent, but you make a call to them. Never again do you see an advocacy group doing good work and you decide not to donate either your time or your money to them. And never again, when in conversation with an ignorant aunt, an underinformed uncle, a foolishly misinformed parent or friend, do you decide to just let their narrative of ignorance go, their nonsense rhetoric fly, but instead you challenge them with the facts and with the idea that the only way this gets better for everybody is if we really do decide that every single segment of society, whether police or black people, immigrants from Mexico, whoever else from the EU coming into our country here in England, matters. Many people are wondering right now what they can do. It seems like the only thing you can do is sit and watch in horror sometimes. But there are things we can do, and the real problem here is none of the things are quick, none of the things are sexy, and none of the things are easy. This is a cultural challenge that's going to take time, policy change, education of the masses to change. One of the frustrating things is that there are a majority of well-meaning people out there who will be sending lovely tweets about their thoughts and their prayers, who will be sending lovely tweets about their outrage, and yet moving them from being well-meaning bystanders to active advocates is what will make the difference. And we have failed to do that so far. So what can you do? Vote. Look at the people around you who would represent you and see if their rhetoric is part of the toxic, poisonous mess that is contributing to a society that behaves in this way. And if they do contribute, don't vote for them. You will now be faced with the dilemma of the fact that you will look on the left, on the right, and in the center, and you will suddenly see that there is no ideal candidate, perhaps. No one who is just perfect on every front. But all I would say to you is if you decide in your moral indignation of the lack of perfection that you will not vote, then you become part of the problem. Bad people in politics rely on the fact that you will be so disgusted that you don't pick up your pen and sign the cross. We've got to get involved in lobbying our elected officials, telling them what we really think and what we really want. Sometimes the only pressure they feel are from special interest groups who have their own specific agenda. So we as individuals have to start picking up the phone, as much of a pain in the arse as it is, and calling people up and leaving messages and saying, I am a constituent and I want this change. Make your voices heard. You can lend your time or your money to any one of the advocacy groups out there. Vet them. Make sure that they're doing the things as you would hope them to be done. The change will be slow and frustrating, but it will happen. The other thing we can do is we can recognize there are precursors to this situation in our lives. Precursor things that create the heat in our society that ferments some of this hate. We've seen it with the EU debate in this country, and we see it playing out in America right now, again and again and again. Poverty, educational disparities. These things have a corrupting effect on our society. And only by voting and demanding that we improve these things will anything change. And then the other thing that has to be done, especially in terms of America, part of this problem is weapons, is guns. Something has to be done about that. Every tragedy is made worse by the fact that instead of a small handgun, it's an arsenal. And lastly, we have an individual responsibility. Educate yourselves. I learn something every day on these issues that I think sometimes I'm quite expert at. But I learn something every day. And don't allow people who spit venom, who scream to the internet nonsense that is provably false, to have their say. We've got to debate these people when appropriate and set them right, especially those closest to us. Don't allow them to repeat the rhetoric, the talking point from another special interest. And not all of these are going to make every special interest happy. But if you're really interested in change, that's what you do. You can congregate if you want, and you can think or pray or whatever else. But prayer without works is nothing.